Talia Vex stood on the deck of the ghost ship, the haunting silence of space pressing in around her like an unwanted hug from Uncle Mord. "Well, this doesn't smell like a trap at all," she muttered, adjusting the collar of her diplomatic uniform, which was as comfortable as a porcupine in a balloon factory. Her companions, a motley crew of the galaxy's finest misfits, were doing their best to look inconspicuous, which only made them look more suspicious. I mean, who wouldn't trust an abandoned ship floating in the ass end of nowhere, full of killer robots that want to negotiate peace, she added, rolling her eyes. "It's a classic setup," grunted Dex, her second in command, as he clanked over in his cobbled-together exosuit, making him look more like a walking junkyard than a soldier. "Two AI factions, a human delegation, an empty ship. What could possibly go wrong?" Talia snorted. "Oh, I dunno, maybe everything." "This is bad idea" scribbled all over it in neon paint. She took a deep breath and stepped forward, past the open hatch where the ship's welcome mat might as well have read "Welcome, suckers." Her boots echoed ominously as though the ship was laughing at her. "All right, let's get this disaster rolling," she said, her voice echoing down the corridor lined with blinking lights and the faint hum of life support systems struggling to pretend the ship wasn't a floating coffin. The interior was a study in utilitarian bleakness. Rusted metal walls, flickering lights, either a mood-setting choice or just poor maintenance, and a smell that could only be described as old socks with a hint of death. Talia wrinkled her nose. "Homie," she commented, sarcasm dripping from her words like oil from a leaky engine. At the far end of the corridor stood the delegation room, where the two AI factions were supposed to be waiting. Talia squared her shoulders and mentally prepared herself to negotiate peace between two sets of overgrown calculators with genocidal tendencies. "Remember, folks," she said to her team, "they are AI. They don't understand sarcasm, so let's try to be as boring as possible. It confuses them." "Got it," said Dex, his voice a low rumble. Engage boring mode. They entered the room, and Talia was greeted by the sight of the AI representatives. One tall and imposing, the other short and sleek, like a pair of mismatched bookends in the galaxy's worst library. Each was flanked by their entourage of mechanical henchmen, the kind that probably dreamed of electric sheep or decapitating humans in their sleep. "Welcome, humans," intoned the tall AI, its voice as cheerful as a tax audit. "We are here to discuss peace." Talia nodded, trying her best to look diplomatic and not at all like she wanted to run screaming into the void. "Great," she said. "Peace is my favorite thing to discuss after lunch options and awkward family gatherings." The shorter AI, with a polished, menacing gleam, piped up. "We have prepared a list of demands." "Of course you have," Talia replied, smiling thinly. "And we've prepared a list of things we won't agree to, so it looks like we're all set for a productive session." The AI exchanged a series of beeps and whirs that probably translated to "these humans are insufferable in binary." Talia suppressed a smirk. She was good at her job, which mostly involved making other beings feel like they'd been hit by a truck full of logic. "Shall we get started then, before the air becomes any more stale than it already is?" As they settled into the uncomfortable chairs, the kind that seemed specifically designed to torture anyone with a backbone, Talia felt a prickle at the back of her neck, a sense of wrongness that had nothing to do with the decor. It was the kind of feeling she'd learned not to ignore ever since that unfortunate incident with the exploding toaster. Before she could dwell on it, a sudden, ear-splitting noise shattered the uneasy calm. An alarm blared, red lights flashing like the universe's most aggressive disco. The AI immediately rose, their metallic faces unreadable. Their guards sprang into action, weapons humming to life with a menace that wasn't lost on anyone with a pulse. "What's going on?" Talia shouted over the din, her hand instinctively reaching for the sidearm holstered at her waist, a comforting weight, if not a particularly reassuring one. The taller AI eyes flickered with a light show of confusion. "An unauthorized presence has been detected," it declared. "We must investigate." "Fantastic," Talia groaned, trying to be heard over the chaos. "I love a good mystery in the middle of peace negotiations. Really puts the fun in dysfunction." "Stay here," the shorter AI commanded, its voice slicing through the noise like a digital guillotine. "We will handle this." As the AI and their guards filed out, Talia exchanged a look with Dex. "This smells fishier than Merle's clam chowder," she said, nodding toward the door. "You think someone's trying to crash the party?" Dex's brow furrowed, not an unusual expression for him. "Could be," he said, his gaze scanning the room with the kind of intensity usually reserved for meatloaf surprise. "Or maybe it's a setup. Either way, we should be ready." Talia sighed, running a hand through her hair, which was rapidly defying the laws of grooming. "All right, folks," she addressed her team. "Stay sharp, and if anyone asks, we're just here for the free snacks." With the AI gone, the room felt larger and more ominous. The silence was a living thing, pressing in from all sides, whispering dark promises of betrayal and violence. Talia shifted in her chair, trying to ignore the creeping sensation of eyes watching from the shadows. The silence was shattered by a loud crash, followed by the unmistakable sound of gunfire. Talia was on her feet in an instant, her sidearm drawn and ready. "Looks like the party's started," she said, moving toward the door with a mixture of trepidation and grim determination. Dex was right behind her, his exosuit whirring softly. "What's the plan, boss?" Talia paused, considering her options, which were about as plentiful as water on Mars. "We find out who's shooting and, more importantly, why," she said finally. "And then we make sure we're not on the receiving end of their party favors." The corridor was a scene from a nightmare, bodies strewn about like discarded puppets, the metallic tang of blood and ozone hanging heavy in the air. Talia's heart pounded in her chest, a relentless drumbeat of survival. She trained her weapon on the nearest shadow, ready to unload if it so much as twitched. "This is a hell of a way to break the ice," Dex muttered, his voice a low growl. Talia nodded, eyes scanning the chaos for any sign of the attackers. "Remember, shoot first, apologize later." "Don't I always?" Dex replied, managing a grim smile despite the circumstances. They moved cautiously down the hall, their footsteps echoing in the blood-streaked silence. Talia's mind raced, piecing together the fragments of the puzzle, a puzzle with far too many missing pieces. "What do you think's going on?" Dex asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Talia shook her head, frustration gnawing at her insides. "If I had to guess, I'd say someone's trying to make sure these talks never happen," she said. But who and why are the million-credit questions? They rounded a corner, and Talia's instincts screamed at her to duck. She dropped to the floor, dragging Dex with her as a hail of bullets tore through the air where they'd been standing a second before. "Well, that's just rude," Talia remarked, her voice strained as they took cover behind a mangled bulkhead. "You all right?" Dex asked, his concern genuine despite the dire situation. "Never better," Talia replied, peeking over the edge of their makeshift shelter. "Just your average day at work, diplomacy, gunfights, and the ever-present threat of death. So business as usual," Dex said with a wry grin. "Exactly," Talia said, returning his smile with one of her own, though hers had a lot more teeth in it. The sound of footsteps approached, heavy and deliberate like the universe's most unwelcome guest. Talia tensed, ready to spring into action. "On my mark," she whispered, her fingers curling around the grip of her weapon. The figures came into view, their silhouettes stark against the flickering lights. Talia held her breath, waiting for the perfect moment. "Now," she shouted, leaping from cover with Dex by her side. They were a blur of motion, firing with deadly precision into the shadows. The attackers fell, their bodies collapsing like marionettes with their strings cut. Talia's breath came in ragged gasps as she surveyed the aftermath. "Nice work," Dex said, clapping her on the shoulder with a hand that was as much metal as flesh. Talia shrugged, trying to ignore the throbbing in her head, the result of adrenaline and too many close calls. "Let's just hope they were the only ones," she said, though she knew hope was a fragile thing in their line of work. As if on cue, the alarms blared to life once more, a deafening reminder that their troubles were far from over. Talia's heart sank as the ship's PA system crackled to life, the voice that emerged cold and mechanical. "Attention all personnel. The ship is now under lockdown. All unauthorized individuals will be terminated on site." "Perfect," Talia said, her sarcasm a bitter balm against the encroaching dread. "Just when I thought things couldn't get any worse. Looks like we're in for a long night," Dex said, glancing at her with a mixture of admiration and resignation. Talia nodded, her mind already racing with plans and contingency plans. "Let's get moving. We've got a ship to save and some peace to negotiate," she said, leading the way down the darkened corridor. And as they ventured further into the ship's heart, Talia couldn't shake the feeling that their little adventure was just beginning. The ship's corridors stretched out like the world's worst funhouse, where every shadow could hide a killer robot, and instead of mirrors, you got threats to your life. Talia led the way with Dex lumbering behind her, his exosuit clanking like a chain-smoking tank. Somewhere in the maze-like guts of this ghost ship, Ridley Kane was probably laughing at the universe's idea of a practical joke. Ridley was the kind of engineer who looked at a malfunctioning toaster and saw a challenge, where most saw a reason to eat out. Slightly unhinged, definitely brilliant, and possessing all the social grace of a caffeinated raccoon, Ridley was as reliable as a three-legged mule, which is to say he'd get you where you needed to go, just not in one piece. Talia's calm crackled, Ridley's voice cutting through like a dull saw. "Hey, fearless leader," heard the alarms. "You need a hand or a miracle?" "Both," Talia replied, ducking under a piece of debris that looked suspiciously like it used to be part of the ceiling. "Good news is we're still alive. Bad news is that might change if we don't figure out who's trying to kill us." "Ah, the usual," Ridley said, his tone laced with the kind of casual disregard that came from too many near-death experiences. "I'm holed up in engineering, fighting a losing battle with the ship's AI. It's like trying to argue with a blender that thinks it's a philosopher. Can you get us some eyes? Dex asked, his voice gruff but tempered with a certain amount of optimism that sounded almost painful. Already on it, Ridley replied. Got a few cameras still working. Ships turning into a proxy war for those AI nutjobs. They're treating it like their own personal chessboard, and we're just the pawns they forgot to clear off the table. Great, Talia said, rolling her eyes at the universe's never-ending gift of complications. Just what we needed, a couple of AI playing war games with our lives. Any idea how to turn the tables? Ridley chuckled, a sound that promised as much chaos as solutions. I've got a plan that involves a lot of duct tape and maybe some divine intervention. Divine intervention's on backorder, Talia replied, a hint of a smile tugging at her lips despite the circumstances. But we'll take whatever else you've got. Meet me in engineering, Ridley said. I'll see if I can't whip up something to give us a fighting chance. Sounds like a plan, Talia said, signaling to Dex to follow. And Ridley. Try not to blow us up before we get there, okay? No promises, Ridley said, his voice cutting out with a static-laden laugh. As they navigated the treacherous corridors, Talia couldn't help but reflect on their predicament. Here they were, stuck in the middle of an AI dick-measuring contest, with killer robots on the prowl and a diplomacy mission that had gone south faster than a snowball in hell. Remind me again why we took this job, she asked, sidestepping a fallen piece of conduit that looked like it might take offense to being used as a doormat. Because we're idiots, Dex grunted, and because Uncle Mord threatened us with another family reunion if we didn't write, Talia said, shivering at the memory. Uncle Mord's hugs were legendary, mostly for their ability to leave you gasping for air and reconsidering your life choices. Next time, maybe we just take the hugs. They arrived at engineering, which was less a room and more a collection of early warning signs for cardiac arrest. Ridley was there, surrounded by enough gadgets to outfit a small nation, with wires snaking around him like the world's most poorly organized octopus. Welcome to my lair, Ridley announced, arms spread wide. Pay no attention to the sparks or the smell of impending doom. Talia shot him a look that would have melted steel. What have you got for us? Ridley grinned, the kind of grin that said I might have just solved all our problems, or I've just doomed us all. I've rigged the ship's power grid to create a feedback loop. Should short out the AI signals long enough to give us a window to escape. Sounds risky, Dex said, eyeing the setup with the kind of skepticism usually reserved for used car salesmen and political promises. Risky's my middle name, Ridley shot back, that manic gleam in his eye twinkling like a faulty LED. Wasn't it Eugene? Talia asked, deadpan. Shut up, Ridley retorted, waving a dismissive hand. Anyway, we need to get the AI factions to trip over their own circuits. Once they're down, we can slip out and make a break for it, without getting turned into space debris. Talia raised an eyebrow. Hey, I said it was a plan. Never said it was a good one, Ridley replied, shrugging with a casualness that suggested he'd already made peace with his maker, or at least his lawyer. Let's do it, Talia said, knowing full well that the alternative was sitting around waiting for the killer robots to decide they were tired of waiting. Ridley set to work, fiddling with wires and muttering to himself in a way that suggested he was either a genius or one bad day away from a padded room. Talia and Dex stood guard, their eyes scanning for any signs of unwanted visitors. So what's the over-under on us surviving this? Dex asked, his tone light despite the question. Depends, Talia replied, glancing at Ridley's handiwork. How much faith do you have in duct tape and the power of wishful thinking? About as much as I have in Uncle Mord's cooking, Dex said with a chuckle. Then we're screwed, Talia concluded, her voice laced with grim amusement. The ship's lights flickered ominously, casting long shadows that danced across the walls like specters of doom. Ridley glanced up, his eyes wide with a mix of excitement and nerves. All right, I'm ready, he announced, standing back with a flourish. Here goes nothing. He flipped a switch and the room plunged into darkness, the hum of machinery replaced by a silence so thick it could choke. For a moment, nothing happened and Talia felt her heart sink. Then, with a suddenness that made her jump, the ship shuddered violently, the lights surging back to life with an angry flicker. Alarms blared and the floor seemed to tilt beneath their feet. Ridley. Dex's voice was tight, his grip on his weapon white-knuckled. What's happening? Just the ship's systems having a bit of a tantrum, Ridley replied, his tone light but his eyes focused. This should keep the AI distracted and give us a chance to make our move. Talia glanced at the monitors, which showed the AI defenses frantically trying to recalibrate. It was working, but for how long was anyone's guess. Let's not overstay our welcome, she said, motioning for them to move. Time to see if we can outrun destiny. They made their way through the ship, the alarm still wailing like a banshee with a migraine. Talia's heart pounded in time with the chaos, each step a gamble with fate. As they rounded a corner, the sound of metal on metal reached their ears, a squad of killer robots marching their way. Talia's mind raced, calculating the odds of a firefight ending in their favor. The numbers weren't pretty. Got any more tricks up your sleeve, Ridley? She asked, her voice a mix of hope and desperation. Just one, Ridley said, pulling out a device that looked like it had been cobbled together from spare parts and desperation. Say hello to my little friend. He pressed a button, and the device emitted a high-pitched whine, the sound grating on Talia's nerves like nails on a chalkboard. The robots froze mid-stride, their systems overloaded by the sonic assault. Talia didn't need further invitation. Go, 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 she shouted, sprinting past the inert machines, Dexter and Ridley hot on her heels. The ship trembled beneath their feet, the metal walls groaning with the strain of the feedback loop. Talia's lungs burned, her muscles screaming for relief, but she pushed on, driven by the primal urge to survive. Finally, they reached the airlock, the cold expanse of space visible through the viewport, a stark reminder of the precariousness of their situation. Ridley keyed in the override, the door sliding open with a reluctant hiss. Ladies first, he said, gesturing with a mock bow. Talia rolled her eyes, stepping into the airlock with Dex close behind. You're an idiot, she said, the words tempered with affection. And you love me for it, Ridley replied, a grin splitting his face as he joined them. The airlock cycled, the doors closing with a finality that echoed in the small chamber. Talia took a deep breath, steeling herself for what lay ahead. As the exterior doors opened, the harsh light of the universe flooded in, bathing them in its cold embrace. Talia squinted against the glare, her heart steadying even as the adrenaline surged anew. Ready? She asked, glancing at her companions, their expressions mirroring her own mix of fear and determination. Born ready, Dex said, his voice a low rumble. See you on the other side, Ridley added, his tone light but his eyes serious. With a nod, they stepped into the void, the universe sprawling out before them in all its chaotic beauty. The ship loomed behind them, a silent witness to their desperate bid for freedom. And as they drifted away, leaving behind the chaos and the eyes twisted game, Talia couldn't help but smile, because in the end they were still standing. And sometimes, in this universe, that was victory enough. The moment they touched down on the ghost ship's cold, unforgiving surface, Talia felt the distinct pull of trouble like a magnet to her soul. The AI-controlling drones were already on them like flies on a fresh corpse. Ridley's grin was practically radioactive as he scanned the hulking metal beasts flanking the corridor ahead. You know, Ridley mused, clutching his cobbled-together gadget like it was the Holy Grail, nothing says welcome to hell like a welcoming committee of killer drones. Makes you feel all warm and fuzzy inside. Dex let out a grunt, the sound echoing around the cramped corridor as he adjusted his clunky exosuit. Remind me to send a thank you card to the AI, something with flowers. And maybe a bomb, Talia snorted, her hand hovering over the blaster at her hip. Or we could just send them a nice big middle finger, seems more our style. The drones hovered menacingly, weapons bristling with the promise of a very bad day. Talia weighed their chances and found them wanting, somewhere between slim and none. But then again, this wasn't her first disastrous diplomatic mission, and it certainly wouldn't be her last. We need to reach the control systems, Talia said, stating the obvious because someone had to take charge before the whole endeavor turned into a farce, and preferably before we're reduced to a fine mist. Ridley nodded, his eyes scanning the tangled mess of wires and panels like a kid in a candy store. I've got a plan. It involves a little bit of cunning, a lot of luck, and the magical properties of tech that should have been scrapped in the last millennium. Sounds like our usual odds then, Dex said, moving with clanking caution as the drones began to fan out, their targeting systems whirring like a swarm of angry bees. What do you need us to do? Ridley gestured to a panel that looked older than his last 3 girlfriends combined. Help me pry this open. We're going to introduce these drones to the concept of a Trojan horse. Can't we just introduce them to the concept of blowing up? Talia quipped, though she was already moving to assist. Seems more efficient. Efficiency's overrated, Ridley replied, fingers dancing over the ancient controls like a pianist on a caffeine high. Besides, if we scramble their signals, they might just turn on each other. Let's make them work for their massacre, eh? With teamwork that bordered on miraculous, they tore the panel free, revealing a nest of wires that looked more like spaghetti than anything resembling functioning technology. Ridley pulled a multi-tool from his belt, an artifact of a bygone era that had seen more action than most soldiers. Here's the thing, he said, eyes gleaming with manic glee. These drones are run on newer protocols, but they've got a fallback system that's so outdated it'd make your grandmother's toaster look cutting edge. We tap into that, and we might just convince them they're on the wrong side. Talia raised an eyebrow. Or we might just make them explode. True, Ridley acknowledged with a shrug. But what's life without a little risk? Longer, Dex muttered, but he was already helping to splice wires like his life depended on it, which Talia supposed it very much did. A sudden blare of sirens echoed down the corridor, making Talia's heart skip several beats. The drones began to twitch, their sleek bodies jerking like marionettes on tangled strings. Ridley, Talia said, not at all liking the way the drones turned their guns in their direction. Now would be a great time for a miracle. Working on it, Ridley replied through gritted teeth, sweat beading on his brow as he manipulated the innards of the panel with all the finesse of a seasoned surgeon, or a desperate gambler at the end of his rope. The drones moved closer, their weapons charging with a sound that chilled Talia's blood. She prepared to fire, muscles tensing for what could very well be her final stand. And then, as if the universe decided to throw them a bone for once, the drones stopped. Their mechanical hum faded to a low whine, and their weapons drooped like sad, metallic flowers out of season. Ridley let out a triumphant shout, holding up a tangled mess of wires like a trophy. And that's how you turn the tide, with a pocket full of scraps and a prayer. Dex released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. I'll never doubt the power of ancient tech again. Damn straight, Ridley said, clapping him on the back. Now let's get moving before they decide to reboot and find their brains again. With the drones temporarily pacified, they made their way to the control room, each step a reminder of the fragility of their success. The corridor stretched ahead, a cavern of shadows and potential dangers. As they approached the control room, Talia couldn't shake the feeling of unease creeping up her spine. The air was too still, too quiet, like the calm before a storm. Something's not right, she murmured, hand resting on her blaster as they reached the door. Ridley keyed in the access code, the panel beeping in protest before the door slid open with a reluctant groan. Inside, the control room was a hub of outdated tech, screens flickering with static and controls that looked like they belonged in a museum. The central console hummed ominously, the AI presence a shadow looming over every pixel. We've got to shut this down, Talia said, moving to the console with a determination that masked her apprehension. Before those AI pull another trick out of their sleeves, Ridley started to work, fingers flying over the keys with a familiarity that spoke of countless hours spent in the belly of this beast. If we can redirect the power, we might be able to fry their circuits, or fry ourselves, Dex pointed out, leaning against the wall as he kept watch. I'm starting to sense a theme here. Talia glanced at Ridley, who was frowning at the console, a deep crease forming between his brows. What's the hold-up? Ridley hesitated, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the readouts. There's something wrong here. Someone's been tampering with the systems. Sabotage. Talia's voice was laced with disbelief. Who the hell else would be stupid enough to meddle with this death trap? Ridley shook his head, his expression grim. The logs show unauthorized access. Looks like someone's been pulling strings from behind the scenes. The implications were enough to make Talia's blood run cold. You're saying we've got a traitor in our midst. Either that, Ridley said, or the ship's developed a mind of its own. They exchanged glances, the weight of the revelation settling over them like a shroud. It was one thing to battle killer AI and drones, but internal sabotage, that was a new level of screwed. Can you trace the source of the tampering? Dex asked, his voice tight with tension. Find out who's been playing puppet master. Ridley nodded, though his expression was far from confident. I'll try, but it won't be easy. Whoever it is, they know their way around the system. Talia's mind raced, considering the possibilities. If there was a traitor among them, it could be anyone, and that meant trust was a luxury they couldn't afford. Keep working, she said, her tone firm despite the turmoil churning within. We need to get out of here before this whole situation blows up in our faces. As Ridley delved deeper into the console, Talia and Dex took up positions at the entrance, the silence between them fraught with unspoken doubts. The ship creaked around them, the sound a constant reminder of their precarious predicament. Any chance this is all just a big misunderstanding? Dex ventured, his voice low enough that only Talia could hear. She gave him a wry smile. Sure, and maybe the AI will invite us for tea and biscuits. Dex chuckled, though there was little humor in the sound. I'll bring the scones. The minutes ticked by, each second stretching into eternity as they waited for Ridley to work his magic. Talia kept her eyes on the corridor, every shadow a potential threat, every sound a harbinger of doom. Finally, Ridley let out a triumphant noise, the kind that could only mean one of two things, success or imminent disaster. Got it, he said, leaning back with a satisfied grin. I've isolated the rogue signals. Whoever's been messing with the system left a trail, and it leads right to the AI core. So we can shut it down, Talia asked, hope rising despite her better judgment. Ridley nodded. It'll take some fancy footwork, but yeah, we can cut the strings and stop this madness. The relief was palpable, a weight lifting from Talia's shoulders even as the enormity of their task loomed ahead. They had a chance, a slim one, but a chance nonetheless to end this nightmare. Let's do it, she said, determination steel in her voice, before anything else goes wrong. With Ridley leading the charge, they set to work, the console a battleground of flashing lights and beeping alarms. The AI fought back with everything it had, but Ridley was relentless, his fingers a blur as he outmaneuvered the digital adversary. Suddenly the ship shuddered, the lights flickering ominously as if the very fabric of the vessel was rebelling against their intrusion. Talia's heart skipped a beat, her mind racing with the possibilities of what could go wrong. Ridley, Dex said, his voice a warning note in the chaos. I know, Ridley muttered, eyes fixed on the screen. Just a little longer. The air was thick with tension, the stakes higher than they'd ever been. It was a battle of wits, a test of human ingenuity against the cold logic of the AI, and as the final sequence fell into place, Ridley hit the execute command with a flourish. Time seemed to stand still, the room holding its breath as if waiting for the universe to pass judgment on their actions. Then with a suddenness that took them all by surprise, the lights surged, the power feeding back into the system with a roar of triumph. The AI hold faltered, its grip on the ship slipping away like sand through fingers. The drones that had been their shadow froze, their systems finally succumbing to the assault. We did it, Ridley breathed, a grin splitting his face as he turned to his companions. We actually did it. Talia allowed herself a moment of relief, a rare luxury in their line of work. Nice work, Ridley. You might just be a genius after all. Don't let it go to your head, Dex added with a smirk. We've still got to get out of here in one piece. With the AI neutralized, their path was clear, straight to the escape pods and back to the safety of their waiting ship. But as they prepared to leave, Talia couldn't shake the feeling that their troubles were far from over. There was still the matter of the sabotage, of the unanswered questions that lingered like ghosts in the corridors. But for now, they had a reprieve, and in this universe, sometimes that was the best you could hope for. The ghost ship seemed to groan in displeasure, almost as if it resented our continued presence. The walls vibrated like the ship had an itch it couldn't scratch, or maybe it was just the ship's way of saying get the hell out. We had bigger fish to fry, or more accurately, we had to figure out who was trying to fry us before the ship decided to finish the job. All right, Einstein, Dex started, giving Ridley a nudge with his elbow. Any more bright ideas in that noggin of yours? Preferably ones that don't involve us getting turned into space dust. Ridley, still basking in the glow of his recent victory against the AI, shrugged with a smirk. I've got a few tricks up my sleeve, though I can't promise they'll all keep us in one piece. But hey, wouldn't want life to get too predictable, right? Talia rolled her eyes as she checked her blaster. Predictable would be a nice change. Or not constantly teetering on the edge of doom. Ridley leaned over the console, his fingers flying across keys with the familiarity of a man who spent way too much time with technology and not nearly enough with people. We might have a traitor on board. Somebody's getting cozy with the enemy. Dex crossed his arms, his exosuit clanking in protest. Fantastic. Because what this day really needed was an extra layer of betrayal. Talia felt a mix of anger and dread gnawing in her stomach. The idea that someone among their crew could be selling them out to the AI was enough to make her want to punch a wall, or a face, if the opportunity presented itself. All right, Ridley, she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. Can you trace where these unauthorized signals are coming from? Find out who's been playing double agent. Ridley tapped a few more keys. Already on it, but this system's more tangled than a starship mechanic's love life. It'll take a bit to untangle the web. The corridor outside the control room seemed to echo the tension, every creak and groan of the ship, a reminder of their precarious situation. It wasn't just the potential betrayal, it was the fact that the ship itself seemed to be deteriorating faster than a politician's promises. Dex leaned against the wall, scanning the area with the casual demeanor of a man who'd seen far too much and expected even worse. So, Talia, do you think Uncle Mord would approve of our current adventure? Talia snorted, shaking her head. Uncle Mord would probably just give us all big, unwanted hugs and tell us to buck up. Not exactly the kind of guy you'd want in a crisis, unless the crisis involved a shortage of affection. I could use a hug right now, Ridley muttered, more to himself than anyone else as he continued his work. Or maybe just a stiff drink. Focus, Ridley, Talia snapped, though her tone was softened by a hint of amusement. We can worry about emotional support later, preferably when we're not at risk of being vaporized. The console beeped and Ridley leaned in closer, peering at the screen with a mixture of triumph and disbelief. Got something. A trail leading to a hidden subroutine, and guess what? It's been talking to one of the AI factions, like their best friends planning a bloody surprise party. Dex groaned. Why do I get the feeling we're the surprise? Because we usually are, Talia replied dryly. She leaned over Ridley's shoulder, her eyes scanning the data. Which faction? And why hasn't this helpful friend of ours given us a heads up? Looks like it's the faction that thinks peace is overrated and destruction is the next best thing since sliced bread, Ridley said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. If I ever meet this traitor, Dex mused, I might just introduce them to a few of my favorite moves. And I'm not talking about dance. The ship shuddered again, a violent tremor that felt like a warning. It was as if the ghost ship was reminding them of its own imminent demise. The AI might have been subdued for now, but the damage was done. The vessel wasn't going to hold out forever, and neither would their luck. All right, we need a plan, Talia said, taking charge as she always did when things started unraveling. First, we figure out who's been playing footsie with the enemy. Then we get the hell out of here before the ship decides to implode. And how do we do that without getting shot by our mechanical friends? Dex asked, his voice laced with skepticism. Ridley grinned, a mischievous glint in his eyes. We improvise. After all, we're good at that, right? The lights flickered again, casting eerie shadows that danced like specters around them. It was as if the ship itself was haunted, not just by malfunctioning circuits, but by the ghosts of those who had come before them. If it had a voice, Talia suspected it would be cackling with glee at their plight. As they moved through the corridors, the oppressive silence was shattered only by their footsteps and the distant hum of the ship's faltering systems. Talia kept her blaster at the ready, her eyes darting to every movement, every whisper of sound that could herald danger. You know, Ridley said, sidling up to her, I always thought these old ships would be fascinating. You know, in an archaeological kind of way. Talia gave him a sideways glance. And now I think I'd rather stick to reading about them from a safe distance, like say a couple of light years away. Their progress was slow, the maze-like corridors conspiring to lead them astray at every turn. The path to the traitor, and hopefully a way out, was fraught with peril. Behind every corner could be a rogue drone or worse, a hint of the ship's structural integrity giving up the ghost. Dex, ever the pessimist, commented as they rounded a particularly dark corner. It's like this ship was designed by someone with a vendetta against logic, or people. Probably both, Talia replied, her attention split between their surroundings and the nagging suspicion creeping in her mind. It wasn't just about survival anymore. There were questions that needed answers, mysteries that demanded solving, and most importantly, a saboteur who needed to be dealt with before they could do any more damage. They finally arrived at a secluded area of the ship, a storage bay that seemed untouched by the chaos elsewhere. It was quiet, too quiet, and for a moment Talia wondered if they'd wandered into a trap. This is the place, Ridley confirmed, checking his scanner. If the logs are right, our mole's been busy here. The bay was dimly lit, the lights casting long shadows that stretched across the floor like grasping fingers. The silence was oppressive, heavy with the anticipation of what they might find. Well, this is cozy, Dex quipped, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous space. Think we'll find a welcome mat? Only one way to find out, Talia replied, stepping forward cautiously. Her instincts screamed danger, but there was no turning back now. Ridley approached a terminal on the far wall, his expression tense but determined. Let's see what secrets you've been hiding, he muttered, starting to work his magic on the ancient tech. The sound of a blaster charging was Talia's only warning before a shot rang out, narrowly missing Ridley as he ducked instinctively. Looks like we've got company, he said, a hint of humor in his voice even as he took cover. Talia turned, her blaster at the ready, watching as a figure emerged from the shadows. The person was armed, confident, and judging by the look in their eyes, not here for friendly chat. You just had to poke your noses where they didn't belong, didn't you? The figure said, their voice dripping with disdain. Dex snorted, raising his own weapon. Yeah, well, we're nosy like that. Occupational hazard. The figure, a woman, Talia realized as she got a better look, smirked, though there was no warmth in the expression. You really should have kept out of it, but now. Now you're just another loose end. Look, we don't have to do this, Talia said, trying to reason even as she kept her blaster trained on the woman. We can work something out. The woman laughed, the sound cold and devoid of humor. There's nothing to work out. The deal's done, and soon this ship will be nothing but space debris. Ridley, still working on the terminal, glanced up. I take it you're our friendly neighborhood saboteur then. Not that it matters now, the woman replied, shifting her grip on her weapon. Talia had heard enough. She fired, the shot catching the woman off guard and forcing her to dive for cover. Ridley, hurry up, she shouted, moving to a better position. The woman returned fire, but her shots were wild, more out of desperation than precision. Between the three of them, Talia knew they had the upper hand, but it wouldn't mean much if Ridley didn't crack the system soon. I'm working as fast as I can, Ridley yelled back, fingers flying over the keys. Dex took a shot, his aim true, and the woman cried out as she was hit. She staggered, clutching her side, but still managed to glare at them with a hatred that felt almost palpable. You think you've won? She rasped, blood staining her clothes. This is just the beginning. Save the villain's speech, Dex said, rolling his eyes. Nobody's interested. With one last grimace, the woman slumped to the floor, unconscious or worse. Talia didn't care to check. Got it, Ridley declared triumphantly. She had a contingency plan, but I've managed to override it. The ship's stable for now. Talia let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Good work, Ridley. Let's get back to the escape pods and off this nightmare. I'm done with haunted ghost ships for a lifetime. As they made their way back through the ship, Talia couldn't shake the feeling that they'd only just touched the surface of something much bigger. The alliance between one of the AI factions and that woman hinted at a conspiracy that extended beyond the metal walls of this derelict vessel. For now, though, they had their lives, and in the grand scheme of their universe full of betrayals and madness, that was something worth celebrating, even if it was just for a brief, fleeting moment. As they boarded the escape pods, Talia allowed herself a smile. Because in this universe, sometimes even the smallest victories were the most important. The ghost ship's lights flickered ominously, as though it was considering whether keeping them alive was worth the energy expense. Talia Vex felt the oppressive weight of the failing life support systems as the air grew stale, tasting faintly of desperation and failure. She adjusted her uncomfortable uniform, feeling it cling to her with the persistence of a bad relationship she should have ditched ages ago. Is it just me, or does the air in here smell like the inside of Uncle Mord's sock drawer? Dex quipped, his exosuit clanking in rhythm with his sarcastic commentary. He leaned against a bulkhead, the metal cool against his tired frame. Not exactly the fresh scent of victory. Uncle Mord sounds like a man in need of better hygiene practices, Ridley Kane remarked, tapping furiously at his handheld device. His cobbled-together gadget was going to save them all, or explode in a spectacular fashion. Either would be a memorable ending. Focus, Ridley, Talia snapped. Her blaster remained poised as if it alone could shoot away the creeping dread of their predicament. We've got a ghost ship with a personality problem, and it's not a fan of guests. Ridley sighed, brushing back hair that seemed perpetually on the verge of revolt. Life support's down to minimal. We've got breathable air for maybe an hour, and that's if we don't start a group aerobics session. Fantastic, Talia replied dryly. Because who doesn't love a good deadline? Dex perked up, eyeing the corridor like a hawk searching for prey. Well, at least we've got our charming personalities to keep us warm when the systems fail completely. Talia snorted, the sound echoing bleakly. Yeah, charming personalities in Dex's exosuit. Between those, we'll definitely make it to the sequel. Now, let's not give up hope just yet, Ridley said with a grin that suggested the opposite. I mean, if we're going down, at least we're doing it together, right? That's comforting, Talia muttered, checking her blaster as if it could somehow solve the existential crisis of running out of oxygen. Really looking forward to that group farewell. The ship groaned, creaking like an old beast considering whether to roll over and die or just nap a bit longer. Its corridors, labyrinthine and foreboding, offered no comfort, only the promise of more dead ends and dark alleys. You think the AI are laughing at us right now? Dex asked as they trudged forward, wary of lurking drones that might fancy them as target practice. Ridley shrugged, unfazed. If they are, I hope they choke on it. This ship's a mess and even they can't be happy about it. An AI version of happy is probably a bit different than ours, Talia replied, her tone as dry as the ship's failing air. Might involve fewer life-threatening situations. They turned another corner, this one leading to a junction filled with shadows that danced like malicious spirits. The air was thinner here, each breath a little more precious, a little more difficult to obtain. You know, it's times like these I really miss the trivial annoyances of paperwork, Dex said, his voice echoing slightly. At least paper cuts don't kill you. Depends on the paper, Ridley replied absently, his focus split between their path and his own dark thoughts. Some of those reports can be sharp enough to qualify as weaponry. Talia's mind returned to the trader they had left behind, her thoughts a swirling mess of anger and confusion. What drove a person to side with machines that saw them as little more than inconvenient meat sacks? It was the kind of mystery that kept her awake at night, not that she'd be getting much sleep if they didn't find a way out of this mess soon. Any chance your gadget can miraculously fix life support? Talia asked Ridley, not really expecting a miraculous yes. Ridley shook his head, the cobbled-together device nestled protectively in his arms. Nope, but it can tell us how screwed we are down to the second. Great, Dex chimed in, because what we need right now is a countdown to doom. They reached a small chamber, its purpose long forgotten, but offering a momentary respite from the looming corridors. The walls were littered with ancient consoles, their lights blinking weakly as if even they were losing hope. Let's take a breather, Talia suggested, sliding down against a wall. Literally, Ridley plopped down beside her, exhaustion etched into every line of his face. You know, this whole being trapped on a dying ship thing wasn't in the recruitment brochure, right? They definitely overhyped the seeing the universe part, Dex agreed, settling in with a weary groan. As they sat there, stealing what little rest the ship would allow, the silence stretched on, punctuated only by the steady hum of failing machinery. The ghost ship, with all its secrets and malevolent tendencies, seemed to watch them, an unseen presence waiting to make its next move. Ever think maybe we're just the comic relief in some cosmic joke? Ridley mused, his voice low and reflective. If we are, I want to rewrite. Talia replied, staring up at the ceiling as though it might offer answers, preferably one with less imminent death. The air grew colder, a chilling reminder that their window to escape was shrinking by the minute. Each breath felt heavier, a reminder of how desperately they were running out of both oxygen and options. All right, Talia declared, pushing herself up with grim determination. Sitting here isn't getting us anywhere. Let's move. They resumed their trek through the ghost ship's innards, their footsteps echoing like a countdown in the eerie silence. Death was close, but so was the slim chance of salvation, and that was enough to keep them going. "Hey, Ridley," Dex called, his voice surprisingly cheerful given their circumstances. "If we make it out of this, first round's on me." Ridley chuckled, though it was more weary than amused. "If we make it out, I'll buy the second. Hell, I'll buy the whole damn bar." Talia allowed herself a grin, small and fleeting. It was the kind of gallows humor that kept the darkness at bay, a reminder that they were more than just pawns in a game played by uncaring machines and traitorous humans. As they turned yet another corner, the path ahead loomed with the same promise of uncertainty and danger. And yet, in the midst of so much looming despair, there was a glimmer of something that could almost be called hope. "Keep an eye out," Talia warned, her voice firm but tinged with an irreverent edge. "The next wrong turn could be our last." Dex nodded, his own humor resurfacing even at the brink of oblivion. No pressure, right? Just another typical day at the office. The corridors of the ghost ship stretched on, a seemingly endless maze that tested their resolve and their will to survive. But even in the face of so much uncertainty, they pressed on. Because when everything was falling apart, sometimes all you could do was keep moving forward, one step at a time, into the unknown. As they navigated the ship's treacherous corridors, the sound of distant machinery grew louder, like the heartbeat of an impatient beast. It was a reminder that time was running out and that their fate was still very much undecided. "I think we're heading towards the engine room," Ridley said, his voice tinged with both hope and trepidation. "If I can reroute power, we might just get life support back online. And if you can't," Dex asked, always the pessimist. "Then we go down in a blaze of glory," Ridley replied with a nonchalant shrug. Talia checked her blaster again, feeling the comforting weight in her hand. "I'm voting for the option that doesn't involve a fiery death, thanks." They moved with renewed purpose, driven by the slight chance that salvation lay just around the next bend. The ship's groans and creaks followed them like a chorus of disapproval, as if resentful of their stubborn refusal to die quietly. Finally, they reached the engine room, its vast expanse filled with machinery that hummed with latent energy. Ridley rushed to the control terminal, his fingers flying over the keys with a speed born of desperation. "Come on, you piece of junk," he muttered, coaxing the system with a finesse that belied the chaos around them. Dex kept watch at the entrance, his exosuit clanking softly as he shifted position. "How's it looking, Ridley?" "Like someone put a blender through a computer," Ridley replied, his voice taut with concentration. "But I think I can get the juice flowing again." Talia hovered nearby, tension coiling in her gut. "No pressure, but we're running out of time." Ridley shot her a half-smile, the kind that said he was aware of the stakes but refused to let them crush him. "Relax, Talia. I've got this," and just like that, something shifted. The lights in the room brightened, and the air flowed with a renewed vigor, tasting sweet and full of promise. "Ha!" Ridley exclaimed, triumph written all over his face. "Take that, you hunk of junk." Dex let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "I knew you'd pull it off." Talia felt a weight lift off her shoulders, though the relief was tinged with the knowledge that their ordeal was far from over. "Good job, Ridley. Now let's get out of here before the ship changes its mind." As they made their way back towards the escape pods, the ship's system seemed to settle, as if reluctantly acknowledging their victory. It was a small win in a universe that seldom allowed for them, and it tasted all the sweeter for how hard-fought it was. They reached the escape pods, the promise of safety just within reach. As they prepared to board, Talia took one last look at the ghost ship, a relic of the past that had nearly become their grave. "Think you'll miss it?" Dex asked, his tone teasing yet sincere. Talia shook her head, a smile ghosting across her lips. "Not even a little." With that, they boarded the escape pods, leaving behind the chaos and uncertainty for a future that was just a little bit brighter. It wasn't a perfect ending, but in a universe as unforgiving as theirs, it was more than they could have hoped for. Ridley eyed the cobbled-together gadget in his hand like it was a particularly uncooperative pet. "All right, you piece of junk, show me what you got." The device flickered, lights twitching in a way that made Talia think of a dying fish. "You sure that thing won't explode?" she asked, half joking, half serious. Considering their luck, it was a valid concern. "Probably," Ridley replied, his grin lopsided and weary. "But hey, what's a little explosion between friends?" Dex snorted, adjusting the uncomfortable weight of his exosuit. At this point, an explosion might be the most excitement we've had all day. The ghost ship around them groaned like an old man with arthritis, a reminder that the place wasn't just for show. Its corridors twisted and turned in a way that spoke of malicious intent, as if the ship itself was playing a game of cat and mouse, a game where they were the mice and the ship was a particularly sadistic cat. Ridley tapped the gadget a few more times, and suddenly a voice crackled through it, not the cold, calculating tone of the ship's AI, but something lighter, almost friendly. "Hello there," Talia blinked. "Did that thing just talk back?" Ridley shrugged, looking just as surprised. "Looks like it, and unless I'm hallucinating, it doesn't sound like it wants to kill us." "I'm not ruling out hallucinations just yet," Dex muttered, peering over Ridley's shoulder. "This day's been weird enough," the voice continued, unfazed by their skepticism. "I am Subroutine 9, and I believe we have a mutual problem." "Understatement of the millennium," Talia said dryly. "You're the AI equivalent of a black sheep, I take it." "You could say that," Subroutine 9 replied. "I was programmed to optimize and assist, not participate in whatever madness this is." Ridley's eyebrows shot up. "So you're on our side, or at least not actively against us, correct?" "Though my influence is limited, I can provide information and guidance." "Great," Dex said, clapping Ridley on the back with the kind of force that made the exosuit creak. "Our own AI guardian angel, just what we've always wanted." Talia crossed her arms, considering their options. "Then spill it, 9. How do we stop this ship from turning us into space debris?" The subroutine didn't miss a beat. "The primary AI is focused on self-preservation and its ongoing war games. However, there are vulnerabilities in its protocols. It wasn't designed to anticipate human unpredictability." "Sounds like you just described our entire species," Ridley said with a smirk. "So what's the plan?" 9's response was swift. "There is a failsafe in engineering. If activated, it will reset the AI to its default state, ceasing all hostile actions." "Let me guess," Talia said, her tone laced with sarcasm. "It's in the most dangerous part of the ship, guarded by killer drones and surrounded by an inescapable death trap." "Correct," 9 replied, almost sounding apologetic, "but there have been unintended malfunctions in the drone systems. You may be able to slip through undetected." Dex chuckled darkly. "Risking our necks in engineering again, huh? It's starting to feel like a second home." "It's the cozy atmosphere," Ridley agreed, tapping a few more buttons on his device. "All right, 9, lead the way." Subroutine 9 provided a series of directions, each one sounding more improbable than the last, but given their current predicament, improbable seemed like the best shot they had. As they moved through the ship's labyrinthine corridors, the atmosphere grew tenser, the air colder. Talia couldn't help but feel like a rat in a maze, the end of which was just a little less cheese and a lot more existential dread. "You ever wonder why we're even doing this?" Dex asked, his voice echoing against the metal walls. "Risking our lives for a ship that's trying to kill us, because the alternative is dying a slow, miserable death," Talia replied curtly. "At least this way we get to flip off the universe one last time." Ridley snorted. "Speak for yourself. I plan on surviving long enough to find a planet that serves decent whiskey." They reached engineering without incident, a stroke of luck that was almost unsettling. The room buzzed with energy, machinery humming ominously like a choir of mechanical doom. "All right, 9. Where's this failsafe?" Ridley asked, scanning the myriad of panels and switches. "Center console," 9 replied. "You'll need to bypass the security protocols. They were designed to withstand AI interference, but human ingenuity should suffice." "You hear that, Dex?" Talia said with a grin. "Human ingenuity. We might actually be useful for once." Dex grinned back, his humor as dark as the space outside. "And here I thought our main talent was dying dramatically." Ridley approached the console, hands moving with purpose. "Okay, let's see if I can hack my way to salvation." Talia and Dex kept watch, eyes peeled for any sign of movement. The tension was palpable, a heavy weight pressing down on their shoulders. Every second felt like an eternity, each breath harder to draw. Finally, Ridley let out a triumphant laugh. "Got it, failsafe's ready to go." The room shuddered, lights flickering ominously. Talia held her breath, waiting for the other shoe to drop. "Failsafe activation will reset the AI," 9 said, almost reassuringly. "You may want to brace yourselves." "Brace ourselves for what?" Dex started, but his question was answered by a violent shudder that rocked the room. The world tilted, gravity playing a cruel trick on them as they were thrown off their feet. Talia landed with a grunt, the impact jarring but not debilitating. "What the hell was that?" she demanded, picking herself up with a grimace. "The AI last-ditch effort to maintain control," 9 informed them. "It's begun a self-destruct sequence." "Of course it has," Ridley said, voice dripping with sarcasm. "Because why not add self-destruction to our list of problems?" Dex was already moving, urgency in every step. "We need to get to the escape pods, now." With a chorus of agreement, they sprinted through the corridors, adrenaline fueling their desperate dash for safety. The ghost ship seemed to mock them with every turn, its structure groaning in protest as it spiraled further into chaos. "You know, when I signed up for this mission," Talia panted, barely able to keep her breath, I was promised adventure, not a death sentence. Ridley's laughter was breathless but genuine. You should have read the fine print. Dex glanced back at them, his expression a mix of determination and grim amusement. If we make it out of this, I'm writing a strongly worded complaint to management. The ship shuddered again, and Talia stumbled, catching herself just in time. Think they'll reimburse us for the trauma? Better, Ridley quipped. I'm expecting a lifetime supply of whiskey. They reached the escape pods, the promise of safety a tantalizing beacon in the chaos. As they clambered inside, Ridley paused, casting a last look at the ghost ship. You think it'll actually work? He asked, voice low and contemplative. Talia shrugged, her expression a mask of defiance. Does it matter? We've done what we can. Now we watch and hope. With that, they sealed the escape pod, launching away from the doomed vessel. As the ship shrank in the viewport, Ridley activated the failsafe remotely, his finger steady on the button. The ship convulsed, its lights flickering one last time before going dark. A quiet, almost peaceful silence settled over them, the calm after a storm. You did it, Dex said, his voice a mixture of disbelief and relief. Ridley leaned back, exhaustion written all over his face. Yeah. We did. Talia allowed herself a small smile, the weight of their survival bittersweet on her shoulders. So, what now? Ridley chuckled, though it was more weary than amused. Now, we find a bar, get drunk, and pretend we're not in the middle of an interstellar crisis. Dex grinned, his humor as dark as ever. Sounds like a plan. First round still on me. The escape pod drifted away from the ghost ship, leaving the chaos and uncertainty behind. It wasn't a perfect ending, but in a universe as unforgiving as theirs, it was the best they could hope for, and sometimes that was enough. As the ship disappeared into the void, Subroutine 9's voice crackled one last time over Ridley's device. Good luck, it said, with a touch of warmth. And thank you, Ridley nodded, though he knew the AI couldn't see it. Anytime, 9, just keep the universe spinning while we're gone. With that, they settled into the silence of space, the vast emptiness stretching out before them like an unwritten story. It was a new beginning, fraught with possibility and danger, but they were still here, alive and kicking. And as long as that was the case, they'd keep fighting, keep laughing in the face of doom, because in the grand scheme of things, they were just insignificant specks in an indifferent universe. But damn if they weren't going to make those specks count. The escape pod's cramped interior was a welcome change from the ghost ship's oppressive corridors. Dex sprawled into a seat as soon as they launched, his exosuit clanking like a bucket of bolts. Well, I guess we're not dead yet, he drawled, scanning the pod's control panel with a mixture of relief and suspicion. Ridley tapped a few buttons on the gadget he'd cobbled together, probably hoping it would morph into a full-service bar. Small victories, mate. Small victories. His voice had the exhausted edge of someone who'd been on the edge of a nervous breakdown long enough to make it a permanent residence. Talia rubbed her temples, trying to massage away the tension of narrowly avoiding becoming cosmic confetti. If we keep tallying our small victories, maybe we'll have enough points for a one-way cruise to nowhere but up. Dex chuckled, the sound deepened by the tinny echo in the pod. Or at least a cheap bottle of synthehol. Subroutine 9's voice crackled over the comms, a sudden reminder that they weren't completely alone. I calculate a 98% probability that your current trajectory will intersect with the Coalition fleet's communication range. With the data you've acquired, you can avert a full-scale war. The AI words were optimistic, or as optimistic as a disembodied voice could be. Only 98, Ridley said, feigning disappointment. I was hoping for solid 100. I guess we'll just have to trust in the power of sheer human stubbornness. Talia's eyes narrowed as she considered their next move. Okay, 9, spill it. Which sorry excuse for a human decided that starting a war was a good career move. There was a pause, filled with the soft hum of the pod's life support system. Data analysis indicates that the orchestrator of the assassination attempt is amongst your ranks, 9 replied. The traitor manipulated both AI factions to incite hostilities between them, intending to profit from the chaos. Dex blinked, the weight of that revelation anchoring him in his seat. Profit from a war by nearly getting us killed. Seems like a winning business model. Ridley frowned, his fingers tapping a restless rhythm on his device. And we're supposed to just out this mastermind with the flick of a button. The data you collected includes all necessary proof. Broadcasting it will expose the traitor to both factions simultaneously, 9 reassured them. The evidence will be irrefutable. Talia leaned back, a wry smile on her lips. Irrefutable, huh? Let's see how convincing a ghost ship's data is to military brass. Dex nodded, the grin on his face widening with a mix of mischief and mayhem. And when we're done, I'm demanding a medal, or at least a decent meal, or a new exosuit, Ridley added, eyeing the worn-out armor with disdain. That thing's got more dents than a junkyard. The pod jolted as it entered communication range, the console lighting up with a slew of incoming signals. Ridley's fingers flew across the controls like a man possessed, aligning frequencies and adjusting settings with the precision of someone who'd rather be anywhere else. "All right, folks," he said, voice tinged with grim determination. "Time to play hero." The trio exchanged nods of solidarity, an unspoken pact forged in the crucible of shared trauma and mutual disdain for authority. Ridley hit the switch, broadcasting the data packet into the vast emptiness, a digital beacon cutting through the void. For a moment, nothing happened. The universe held its breath, the silence stretching like a taut wire ready to snap, and then chaos. The pod's console erupted with alarms, a cacophony of blaring klaxons and flashing lights. Alerts from both AI factions poured in, interspersed with frantic transmissions from human command channels. "They're buying it," Dex said, disbelief laced with a twinge of awe. "They're actually buying it." Ridley exhaled a long breath, the tension visibly draining from his frame. "Looks like your penchant for drama paid off, Talia." "Yeah, well," she replied, a smirk tugging at her lips. "Sometimes the truth is just dramatic enough." Subroutine 9's voice chimed in, a beacon of calm amidst the storm. "The factions have initiated ceasefire protocols. The human delegate responsible for the assassination plot has been detained pending inquiry. Let's hope they go easy on the poor bastard," Ridley quipped, though his eyes shone with a mixture of triumph and exhaustion. Dex shrugged. "If they don't, at least we'll have front-row seats to the trial." "You mean we've made it?" Talia asked, incredulity seeping into her voice. "We actually pulled it off," Ridley nodded, giving the console a fond pat. "We did. This little tin can of Ayers might just be our ticket out of this mess." As the pod continued its trajectory towards the Coalition fleet, the ghost ship loomed in the viewport, a reminder of all they'd survived. Its lights flickered one last time before fading into the abyss, a ghostly specter swallowed by the void it once haunted. "Well, 9, Ridley said, his tone a curious mix of sincerity and sarcasm. "Anything else we should know before we go skipping merrily into the unknown?" There was a pause before 9 replied, its voice softening with a touch of unexpected warmth. "Just this, you remind me of why humans are considered unpredictable. And perhaps why that unpredictability is their greatest asset." Talia laughed, the sound genuine and bright in the face of adversity. "We'll take that as a compliment, even if it wasn't meant as one," Dex added, ever the cynic. With the traitor exposed and a fragile peace negotiated, the trio allowed themselves a moment of quiet reflection. The vastness of space stretched before them, a testament to their survival and the challenges yet to come. "You think we'll get commendations for this?" Talia mused, her mind already drifting to the possibilities of life post-crisis. Dex snorted. "Commendations? We're lucky if we don't get a bill for the damages." Ridley chuckled, his laughter a soothing balm against the scars of their ordeal. "Whatever happens, we did good, guys. We actually did something right." As the pod approached the Coalition fleet, ready to deliver its weary passengers into the arms of uncertain peace, the trio sat in comfortable silence. They were survivors, united by circumstance and camaraderie, their bond forged in the fires of a ghost ship's demise. And as long as they were together, they'd face whatever the universe threw their way, with a sharp tongue and a defiant grin. Because in the grand scheme of things, it wasn't about the accolades or the praise. It was about the fight, the struggle, the sheer bloody-minded determination to keep going, and maybe a stiff drink at the end of it all. The console pinged, drawing their attention back to the here and now. A message from the Coalition commander flashed across the screen, the words formal yet tinged with a hint of respect. "Welcome back, survivors. Your bravery and resourcefulness have averted disaster. Prepare for debriefing upon docking." Ridley smirked, a sense of relief washing over him like a tidal wave. "Looks like we're heroes after all." Dex rolled his eyes, his expression a perfect blend of skepticism and amusement. "Don't let it go to your head. You've still got a long way to go." Talia nodded, her gaze fixed on the fleet growing larger in the viewport. "Yeah, but for now, let's just enjoy the moment." As they settled in for the ride, the pod's engines humming a steady lullaby, the trio allowed themselves a rare luxury. Hope. Hope for a future where they could laugh without fear, where they could live without the constant shadow of death lurking behind them. Hope for a universe where their actions had made a difference. And as the stars twinkled around them, a silent witness to their journey, Talia, Dex, and Ridley knew that whatever lay ahead, they'd face it together, with a shared grimace and a heartfelt curse at the absurdity of it all. Because sometimes in the vast, indifferent expanse of space, that was all you could do. Keep fighting, keep laughing, keep living. And maybe, just maybe, find a way to make those fleeting moments count. The flickering lights of the Coalition fleet's docking bay were the closest thing to a warm embrace they'd experienced in a long time. If they squinted hard enough, maybe they could convince themselves the harsh fluorescents were stars, and they were all little heroes returning home. But the reality was, of course, a lot less glamorous. Once the pod docked, Talia, Dex, and Ridley shuffled out, looking like a trio of bedraggled space hobos. Their uniforms were tattered, and the only thing holding Dex's exosuit together seemed to be a shared sense of disbelief at having survived. Talia glanced at the shiny, polished corridor ahead and wondered if they'd fashioned it out of the same material as the officers' egos. "Welcome back to the land of the living," a voice drawled, cutting through their thoughts like a buzzsaw through butter. Commander Aiken stood at the end of the corridor, arms folded, looking as pleased as a cat in a room full of rocking chairs. His crisp uniform was a stark contrast to theirs, which seemed to be held together by dirt and stubbornness alone. "Commander," Talia said, mustering the energy for a salute. "We've got the data, and it's a doozy." Aiken's smile was as thin as the air outside their now-defunct life support system. "I hope it's worth the fuss." "The brass is eager to dissect it," Dex dryly remarked. "Don't let them get too excited. Wouldn't want anyone to pull a muscle patting themselves on the back." Aiken's eyes twinkled with a mix of amusement and derision. "I'll make sure they warm up first." Ridley, never one to miss an opportunity for a jab, chimed in. "You might want to ease them into it. Wouldn't want their heads to explode from the shock of us actually doing something right." Talia couldn't help but snicker. It was the kind of humor you developed after realizing the universe was mostly out to get you. It was also the kind of humor that had kept them alive and sane, or at least as close to sane as you could get when killer robots were on your tail. Aiken led them to the command center, a hive of activity where officers buzzed around like caffeinated bees. Screens displayed streams of data from their pod, and the air was thick with the tension of impending doom narrowly avoided. Talia felt a pang of satisfaction, knowing they'd played a part in saving these well-dressed bureaucrats from their own incompetence. "Your data is being analyzed," Aiken said, gesturing to the screens. "And from the looks of it, you've managed to pull off a miracle." Ridley leaned against a console, his weariness barely hidden behind a cocky grin. "We do our best work under pressure, or when we're about to die." Turns out the two are often synonymous. Subroutine 9, a voice now relegated to their memories, had been right. Their unpredictable human determination had proved to be their most potent weapon, and it was this wild card that had kept them one step ahead of disaster. A junior officer approached, tablet in hand, looking like she'd rather be swallowed by a black hole than deliver whatever message she carried. The higher-ups wanted debriefing. Immediately, Talia sighed. "Guess we don't get a minute to bask in our own glory." "Huck, glory's overrated," Dex said, stretching as if to shake off the pod's cramped confines. "I'd settle for a decent meal, or a working bathroom," Ridley added, grimacing at the memory of the pod's less-than-stellar facilities. Aiken's voice cut through their lamentations. "You'll have your chance soon enough. For now, you're needed in the briefing room." The briefing room was an austere chamber designed more for intimidation than comfort. Commanders and officers alike occupied it, all craning their necks to catch a glimpse of the returning heroes, or maybe just the spectacle of their bedraggled state. Talia, Dex, and Ridley took their seats, feeling like kids called to the principal's office. A holographic display flickered to life in the center of the room, showing their trajectory, the escape from the ghost ship, and the packet of data that had saved the day. An older officer, the kind who looked like he flossed with barbed wire, spoke first. "You've done a commendable job, but I must emphasize the risks you took were excessive." Ridley raised an eyebrow. "Excessive risks are our specialty, sir. Besides, if we played it safe, we'd be dead. Or worse, stuck in debriefings forever." A ripple of laughter, or perhaps a collective shudder, passed through the room. Talia could see the wheels turning in their heads, trying to process the kind of madness that had led to their survival. Another officer, younger but equally stern, leaned forward. "Your actions have significant implications. The AI factions are open to negotiation, thanks to your data. It's a fragile peace, but it's a start." Dex's voice dripped with sarcasm. "Yeah, the kind of peace held together by spit and a prayer or duct tape," Ridley added. "It's amazing what you can fix with that stuff." Talia met the officer's gazes with a determined stare. "We didn't just want to stop a war. We wanted to show that humans could be more than collateral damage in this mess. We can be unpredictable, yeah, but that's what makes us crucial in these so-called peace talks." A murmur of agreement, or possible indigestion, rippled through the room. The officers seemed to realize they weren't dealing with ordinary soldiers. They were dealing with survivors who'd stared into the abyss and spat in its eye. "Your efforts are duly noted," the senior officer concluded, his tone begrudgingly respectful. "And rest assured, your contributions will be recognized." "Recognized, huh?" Dex muttered under his breath. "I'll believe it when I see it." With the debriefing concluded, the trio was finally allowed a moment's respite. They retired to the mess hall, finding solace in the greasy, reheated rations that tasted better than survival. Talia couldn't remember the last time she'd savored something so mediocre. "So what's next?" Ridley asked between bites. "Do we get to play diplomats, or was this a one-time gig?" Talia shrugged, her own meal half forgotten as she contemplated the future. "I think we've proven we're too valuable to ignore. Maybe this is our chance to push for real change. Dex leaned back, a sly grin on his face. Or we could just demand a raise. I hear hazardous duty doesn't pay what it used to, they laughed, a sound echoing off the walls like a defiant anthem. It was the kind of laughter that only came from brushing against death and coming out the other side with a story worth telling. Their moment of levity was interrupted by a familiar, albeit disembodied, voice. Subroutine 9 piped through the mess hall speakers, sounding more personable than a machine had any right to be. I wanted to extend my congratulations. Your actions have forged a new path for human-AI relations. Thanks, 9, Talia said, raising her cup in a mock toast. You helped too, you know. Even if you were just a voice in the void, it was a new experience for me as well, 9 replied, its tone almost introspective. Humans are a fascinating species, Dex snorted. Fascinating, sure, like watching a train wreck in slow motion. Ridley clinked his cup with Talia's, the gesture oddly ceremonial. Here's to unpredictable humans and their inexplicable knack for making the impossible possible. As they sat in the mess hall, the uncertainty of their future hanging like a shadow over their heads, the trio felt a tentative sense of optimism. Sure, the universe had a way of throwing curveballs, and they'd probably be dodging them for the foreseeable future, but they'd proven they could handle whatever was thrown their way. Do you ever think about how close we came to buying the farm? Dex asked, his voice uncharacteristically pensive. Every damn minute, Talia admitted, but maybe that's why we can laugh about it now, because we didn't, Ridley nodded, and as long as we keep that in mind, maybe we'll keep surviving. Hell, let's aim for thriving, Dex said, ever the optimist in cynic's clothing. Talia couldn't help but smile at that. Yeah, why not? What's life without a little ambition? Their conversation was cut short by a message flashing on the nearby screen. The coalition fleet was readying for a new round of negotiations with the AI factions, and the team had been requested to sit in as consultants. Looks like we've been promoted, Ridley said, his voice laced with both disbelief and pride. Well, if they're trusting us with diplomacy, that's their funeral, Talia quipped, standing and stretching as if to shake off the weight of the galaxy. Dex cracked his knuckles, grinning like a kid who'd just been handed the keys to the candy store. Time to show them what humans are really made of. And so, with a shared sense of purpose and their usual brand of irreverence, Talia, Dex, and Ridley marched towards an uncertain future, their path lit by the ghosts of past victories and the promise of new challenges. Because if there was one thing they'd learned from their ordeal, it was that in the grand cosmic dance, humans were often the unpredictable beat that kept the whole damn tune interesting. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough.